Welcome to Out with Dan, the podcast that spotlights and examines the voices of LGBTQ+ authors, characters, and our allies. Together, we lift our voices and we tell our stories. I'm Dan White. Join me as I chat with this week's author. Hello and welcome back to Out with Dan. Today, I'm totally excited to talk to Heather Graham, who's a USA Today and New York Times best-selling author. Welcome, Heather.
Hi, thank you. Thank you.
I'm so excited. I'm curious, do you feel like your writing style has changed much since you began?
Do you know what? That is an interesting question. And I'm honestly not quite sure of the answer. I would probably have to ask somebody who's reading things, but I think one of the things that I don't know, some people say it's a bad thing, some people say it's a good thing, but I was one of those kids whose parents were just great readers. I read everything known to man, sci-fi, mystery, romance, you name it, history, a lot of history. My parents were Scottish and Irish immigrants who came over with a ton of books. And so I fell in love with reading. And then when I started writing, I went in a lot of different directions. And some people say that that's a very bad thing to do. You need to immediately brand yourself. But I'm grateful to say I'm still standing, doing more in the thriller line right now. But I love everything. So I feel I've been very lucky to be able to write in many different genres. And
I think that's I think that's an amazing thing, because as a reader, I read all different kinds of genres. So I think, for me, to give a compliment, I think if you're able to write in different genres, that's a wonderful thing. I do know that when you're starting out, it can be a little tricky. So you started with historical romance, is that correct?
Well, I started with, the very first thing I sold was a short horror story to Twilight Zone magazine. And then I was very young, early 20s. And I majored in theater in college, and I was doing dinner theater in South Florida, which did not pay a great deal, but I loved it. But when we had 3 of the 5 children, I literally couldn't afford to go to work anymore. So that was when I started writing. And I'd read everything, but they came out with, at the time, there were many more companies back then than there are now. And Dell came out with a romantic line, which seemed more realistic to me. People could have been in love before, they could have jobs, they could have careers, it seemed a great deal more realistic. And I sold my first book to Dell, and it was a romance, a contemporary romance. And then
that's it. And that's after horror.
No, I was going to say that the trick here was that I really loved history, and I had actually written a historical, but the contemporary line didn't want to see it. And then there was a woman who owned something called Romantic Times, and she came to Florida, and there was an ad from an editor, Liza Dawson at Pinnacle Books, who was saying she was looking for historicals with a voice similar to Heather Graham. And I'm kind of like, and so I did send them to her, but I did have to come up with a pseudonym. So,
okay. I do know that you write under Shannon
Drake, and Shannon Drake came from like a pseudonym. I need deep thought. And she said, well, you have about 60 seconds. So 2 of my sons, Shane and Derek, came through the room. And so Shannon Drake came into being.
I love it. I love it. So your latest book, or at least one of your latest books, is Shadow of Death. I enjoyed this. I love the fact that it sort of has a bit of a biblical title. Was that intentional, or was that just something that happened?
Well, there are 4 books in that series. Danger in Numbers, Crimson Summer, Shadow of Death, and I think the last one is Comes the Reaper, something about the Reaper. I'm sorry, just forgot my own title. But they are based on the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. But from the standpoint of, I don't know, when I was a little kid, my father said something to me that I absolutely love to this day, as he said, there's nothing wrong with most religions. What's wrong with religion is what men choose to do with it. So in this book, people are manipulating the different aspects of the Bible to fit what they need for their concept of what they're going to do.
So I gonna give your dad props because he certainly was intelligent, because that really is true. I mean, I think most religions, most are based on some type of love. And
Yeah.
then it's how we use to torture other people or control them. That is something you did very well in this book. It was
Oh,
very
thank you.
enjoyable.
Thank you.
Can you give our readers a little bit of an idea of what Shadow of Death is about?
Well, it's the third in this series, and it features my home state, Florida, and it does move to different places. I believe Shadow of Death, they're in Colorado, I think, because that's where they find some very sad situations of things that have gone on. But the four books in the series concentrate on each of the four horsemen of the apocalypse. So people are manipulating famine and disease and all kinds of things, to make things, to twist them into thinking in a certain light. So I personally think it's kind of a comment on us, because we as human beings tend to believe what we wish. And sometimes facts matter and sometimes they don't, depending on how we want to see things. But I think too, I still, I believe in the majority of human beings as being good creatures. However, there are those who exist who are not. So.
I totally agree. One thing that came up, one of the characters was described as being a good boy, good girl. And one of the things I thought about was, with a cult type of situation, they do prey upon people who are a rule follower by and large. I can't imagine that if you're the leader of a cult, you're looking to brainwash someone. And so you're looking for someone who's a rule follower, because you don't want every rebel, because you could never control a whole room full of rebels. And it was something I hadn't really thought of. I think I thought back about Jim Jones and the other things that have gone on in my lifetime. And I thought, oh, well, these people are weak. And then I think maybe in some ways they are, but I suspect they were probably rule followers. They were good boys and good girls. Was that something you wanted?
I also think that sometimes one of my characters winds up in a situation that he has to get out of, because his parents actually were very good people. Mom born to tremendous wealth, and then seeing how it wasn't shared in any way. And therefore wanted something where life was more equal, where you could easily be talked into, yes, the person living on the street, with nothing and a broken leg needs some help. And so it was attempting to see that things, were evened out a little bit. So in that case, I guess you're right. It could be rule followers, or then sometimes, you see a situation and you're thinking it's wrong, or it needs to be fixed, or, oh, look how good this is. I believe in this. And then people do get out. I was watching a documentary on Jonestown recently. And the sad thing is, a lot of people were trying to get out right when it went down. So people do begin to realize.
And I think a lot of times when you're in a situation like a cult, you're sort of into it 100%. And so it's not like you have this unlimited bank account or ATM card where you just get out, because
oh yeah, you got to have the resources. Right? You have to find the way. Yeah, it can be very difficult. But I think you also get into things, even thinking about today's Pearl Harbor Day. So when getting into thinking about World War II, a lot of the Germans were very good people, but they're terrified. You get caught, trying to help somebody or do something, you go to a concentration camp yourself. So
Precisely.
yeah. And then we don't always learn, because as a student in college, one of the first places I went was Dachau. And I was like, oh my God, why would they keep this? But then you see the George Santayana saying, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. So we need to remember our bad things and try to make sure we go in a different direction.
That's right. And part of, because here I'm gonna go on a little bit of book banning. So things like banning books and trying to erase history and saying it didn't exist. I mean, if we say things don't exist, number one, we exploit people twice, and then we remain ignorant to what really happened in life, and we are destined to repeat it.
Yes, and that is something that is very upsetting to me at this particular time, being where I am. But I still feel it's funny.
I love where you live. I lived there a long time. I just would like to sort of extract some of the things where you live out of it, so it would be the beautiful place it was when I was there.
Well, trust me. I have a friend who told me one time, I've lived my whole life here, and I have this saying, I can't believe it, I'm thinking about leaving. And he said, don't leave. Who will change things back if you leave?
So, that's very true. That is true. So you've also given us some really, what I would call sexy and fun characters. I loved Amy and Hunter's interaction. They love each other. They interact really well with each other, and they respect each other. Was that an intentional thing on your part as an author?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, definitely. That is part of a great deal of what I do now, is that even the crew of Hunters / Blackbird, and then whatever else I'll be going into. Yeah.
I love it. I really do. I'm a big romance lover, and I like it when I'm reading a thriller, a mystery, a horror story where there's still some love in there mixed in, and it feels natural, and that's a good thing.
Well, I think it's hard, but this is one of the good things of having 5 children, is I prey on all their friends, and between them. Yeah, between them, I have a U.S. Marshal I can talk to, Miami-Dade Metropolitan Homicide Detectives. I have a lot of people I get to talk to, and
so. When you and your husband set out to have children, did you envision that they would bring characters to you?
No, actually, that wasn't in the plan, but it's worked nicely.
Hey, you just got a nice bonus out of it. I love that. So what are you working on now or next? I know that book number 4 comes out, I believe, in June in this series. What else are you working on?
No, it comes out, I think I just saw it comes out on April 2nd. I think I was just
even sooner.
It's April 2nd. Yeah. And that will be the end of the Four Horseman of the Apocalypse. And right now I am working on Blackbird, which is the crew of Hunters in Europe. They're part of an FBI unique unit. And and this is something I've got to recommend for your viewers to watch. One of the stories are based on historic killers, contemporary killers who are imitating the past history. One of them is on America's first serial killer, H.H. Holmes, or Mudgett, Herman Mudgett. And it turns out that a very good friend of mine, I belong to everything, very good friend of mine in the Horror Writers Association, is the great-grandson of Herman Mudgett. So he didn't get to know this until he was 40. And he's one of the nicest guys you ever want to meet, talented writer. And he actually does, now I can't remember whether it's discovery, biology, or I don't know, look up Jeff Mudgett, Mudgett. And he's got a great show on with an ex-CIA agent where they go searching for clues to find out if he was also Jack the Ripper. So very interesting.
That is interesting. I look forward to that.
It's, very interesting. Like I said, nice guy, and it pays to have friends in the field.
Yes, it does indeed. So I have a sort of a oddball question for you, and this is sort of for the other writers as well. Do you remember what it felt like when you learned that you had surpassed 1 million in book sales?
Well, of course, I was incredibly happy, and just as again, very grateful because we did have 5 children, and as all parents out there know, those little creatures are very expensive. So very, very grateful, as I remain to this day, grateful that I've been privileged to do this for a living. Um, and I'll tell you one that was funny, though, is when my first historical novel came out. It happened to come out at Easter and have a purple cover. And back in those days, we had mall stores. And I was walking in the mall with my children, and Walden's had decorated their window with it. And I was so stunned that I stopped walking and misplaced a child who kept on walking. Luckily wound up at Macy's and had somebody page Derek's lost mother.
That is priceless, Heather. Is Derek still in therapy, or he's over that?
No, thankfully, Derek went on to Pratt, got a master's and all that kind of stuff. So Derek's doing quite well. Although every once in a while he does remind me. With 2 children of his own now, he'll know to keep count.
Oh, that is absolutely priceless. Oh, Heather, I have so enjoyed this. Do you have a website or social media you'd like to share?
I do. I'm on Facebook, I think, is Heather Graham Author. And I'm actually on the others, but I don't really get on that often. And my website is the original heathergraham.com, because sadly, I am a little bit older than the other Heather Graham. So I'm the original heathergraham.com.
Well, I can't speak about her because I haven't interviewed her, but I've interviewed you and I've had such a wonderful time.
Well, and guess what? We both really have the name. She is Heather,
you do it.
Heather Jane Graham, and I am Heather Elizabeth Graham. So.
I love it. I love it. So thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Heather. Hang on for me just a second. Thank you for joining me for this week's episode of Out with Dan. You can find more information about this podcast and its host at OutWithDan.com, on Twitter at OutWithDan, and on Instagram and Facebook at GoOutWithDan. This podcast is hosted by Authors on the Air Global Radio Network, and the theme music is provided by bensound.com. Join us again soon for the next episode of Out with Dan.